Right, ladies and gentlemen, this is this last session for the Aquarius Hall today, and this is another book launch. Sorry, okay. So, moderating we'll be having Mohammed Hanif Saab, as you all can see. I'll briefly introduce him, and then I'll hand over the discussion so that it can proceed. Mohammed Hanif Saab, as we all know, is a very famous Pakistani writer, novelist, writes very often for the New York Times, some very compelling pieces. But he's most famous for his first book, that is A Case of Exploding Mangoes, which is very famous for being long-listed for the 2008 Man Booker Prize and shortlisted for the 2008 Guardian First Book Award. And right after that, Hanif Sahab wrote the rather compelling Our Lady of Alice Bhatti. So, Hanif Saab, I'll hand it over to you from now, and I hope we have a great discussion. Thank you. Yes. Can you check it again?
Yeah. Hello. Thank you all for coming. Steffen Kopetzky, welcome to Karachi. Steffen is our guest, and he insists that he'll have the first word, so I'll hand him over the mic.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. We had a tour through Pakistan, and final destination of this tour was Karachi. When the things were beginning, the invitation, the possibility of going to Karachi, to Pakistan, for a kind of reading tour, ending up in Karachi, I discussed it with my wife. And she said, do you really think it's a good idea that we go to Pakistan with the book? You had been around, I toured Central Europe, and in Europe right now, it's kind of some news if you tell your friends, if you tell your family, well, I'm having a reading tour in Pakistan. We discussed it. And finally I said, okay, maybe it's dangerous, but at the end I will meet Hanif. And then she said, okay, go then. And the reason why she said is that we know each other, and I call him, and he is my best subcontinental friend. And it's a personal thing. We met each other for 4 or 5 days during the last 9 years. But there is something else about him, not just the personal relationship. It's his book, A Case of Exploding Mangoes, was a key book for me when I started to, after 6 or 5 years of research, there was the point I had to start to write this book. And I couldn't find a clue to start. I didn't know how to get into the story because I decided that my main character would be a soldier of the Imperial Navy of Germany, means 100 years ago. And I wasn't a soldier, I hadn't been to the army, I don't know soldiers, and it's not very common in literature of Germany nowadays to write about the army or to write about a soldier. Maybe you write about the Second World War or something, but I wanted a positive character. I wanted somebody the reader would like. And when I read the Mango book, A Case of Exploding Mangoes, I found the clue, because this book, it's very rarely one, I don't know another one, that shows you the world of a soldier with intimacy and tenderness, intelligence. It's a book about emotions, about friendship, about family, revenge also, but the structure of an army seen by the eyes of a young man. And, well, Hanif, that's really true. You inspired me, you gave me the clue, and so I could start to write the book. And yeah, that's the reason why I came here to say that in front of a fantastic audience. Thanks for being you, and thank you for being the writer of
Thank you, Steffen.
A Case of Exploding Mangoes.
You're very kind. While you were telling me about the discussion with your wife, it suddenly occurred to me, because I have been to his town where he's a local politician as well. So maybe your wife wanted to get rid of you for a few days, and she said, okay, go away and meet Hanif. But we're here to talk about Steffen has written 7 books, and this is his latest. It's called Risk. It hasn't come out in English as yet, but it's being translated, and I've read an excerpt. And it's a fascinating read, especially because for the last few years, we've been listening to this word, which has become like, part of our vocabulary. The word has been around for a very long time. But jihad is sort of is a word that's used a lot these days, not just in Pakistan, but around the world. And he's written a book about something that happened about 100 years ago, and this thing is called German jihad. So Germans kind of got the taste for jihad about 100 years ago, and that's why it is very relevant. It's a book of our times, although it's a historical novel. So Steffen, please tell us a little bit, how did Germans get into jihad?
Well, they invented it in a way. Germans are very well known for making very good plans and having very good organizations. And when the First World War started, they had a plan to beat France and then Russia. If you imagine these large and rich and very potent countries at these days, it was quite an idea. They planned, go to France, beat the French in 6 weeks, then bring all the troops on the Eastern War Theater and beat the Russians. This was the plan. It was called Schlieffenplan. It was a general, Schlieffen. And after 4 weeks, it was clear that this plan failed because the French weren't beaten. A large theater of war in the West appeared. And the Russians, on the other side, were much, much more quicker than the Germans expected them. They thought the Russians would need 6 weeks to get mobilization, but they needed 2 weeks. And so finally, Germany found itself in the position of the loser, and they knew it was about troops, material, the bad position, and they started to make other plans, Plan B, Plan C. And Plan B was given by a man, Max von Oppenheim, just call him Oppenheim. He was a diplomat. He worked in Cairo at the embassy, and he was not a high-ranked diplomat, but yeah, he was in the embassy in Cairo, and he was very fascinated by the Orient, and he met certain intellectuals, thinkers all over the Islamic world that would concentrate in Cairo at these days, and he learned about the new idea of political Islam, which appeared at these days very, very clearly, especially in Cairo in Egypt. And then when the war started, he went back to Berlin and became head of a small secret intelligence team. And he developed a plan, master plan. It was called Memorandum of the Revolutionizing of the Territories of Our Enemies. And that meant nearly the whole Islamic world, because nearly every country with Muslim culture was a colony of France, of the Russians in Central Asia, and especially, of course, of the British Empire. And they thought, okay, we should try to rise, to bring up a worldwide jihad from Morocco over Algeria, Tunisia, Egypt, Persia, to British India. And British India was the most interesting part of it, because it was the most precious diamond in the collection of the British Empire. And the British brought a lot of their troops from India to the Western War Theater, and even to the...
How many troops?
1.5 million Indians fought in Europe. That meant, of course, that there were not that much troops left in British India, and so they decided to send, as one part of this worldwide plan, to send one expedition to Kabul and to give Emir Habibullah Khan, the Emir of Afghanistan, the idea to mobilize the Afghan army with about 50,000 troops and the tribes of the Parthans to invade British India in the name of Islam. And this expedition had to go through Mesopotamia, through Persia, through the deserts. They were doing it with horses. And they finally reached Kabul. And this is the book about it.
Yes. I just read today one of the letters that was written during that time, and it's in Urdu, and it's one line I still remember, कि इन अंग्रेज़ों ने मुसलमानों का खाना खराब कर दिया है. So this was Germans kind of telling us about, and the language is exactly the same which is used these days for, so maybe Germans did invent this modern jihad.
Yeah, the modern, of course.
And this plan has finally, after 100 years, worked out.
Yeah.
I would like you to give us a flavor of the book. Would you please read us
yes,
an excerpt from the book? Yeah.
Thank you very much for that invitation. The point is, I know you have more the discussion thing on stage when it comes up to literature. In Germany, we have the tradition of reading actually from the text. So I will be very happy, maybe you will be happy too, to read you 2 chapters. One thing is, I have to say before, the Germans needed the Ottoman Empire as a partner. And there are ships, German ships in the Mediterranean that became part of the Turkish fleet. And these ships were very important to bring the First World War to the Near East. And I like to read about the action of the ships in the Black Sea. They started the war against Russia, and this was the necessity of bringing the Sultan, the Caliph of the Sunnites, to declare the jihad. The German Admiral Suchet arranged his fleet in a 2-pronged formation and gave it orders to patrol 4 areas. 5, if one counted the modest mine-laying operation in the strait between the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. The Russian fleet had to be somewhere, most likely grouped together and strong. The Admiral Suchet was prepared to lose at least one of the 4 parts of his fleet, but that was the price that would ensure the future of the Ottoman Empire on the side of the Germans. If the Russians attacked, which was more than likely, war would finally break out. But the Russian fleet simply did not turn up, nowhere, neither at Odessa, nor at Sevastopol, nor at Feodosia, and not a single battleship of the Tsar's fleet was docked at all at the oil port of Novorossiysk. While the Breslau, this was one of the German ships, was laying mines, the torpedo cruiser Berg Isadwet, built at the Germania dockyards in Kiel in 1906, was leisurely taking stock of the steamers stocked in the port of Novorossiysk. If you opened your right hand and cocked your thumb a bit to the left, it would resemble the position and form of the Bay of Novorossiysk, a perfect, spacious natural harbor. Finally, around 10 o'clock in the morning, the Breslau and Berg met again where the western reaches of the Caucasus lay far in the distance. The very young German commander of the Berg was able to report to the Breslau deck officer via telegraph that 16 steamers were presently docked in the inner harbor, including 1 Dutch and 1 British vessel. They contacted the Russians, demanded the surrender of their 14 steamers and threatened bombardment if they refused, but had not yet received a response. Frigate Captain Kettner was ruffled that he wasn't allowed to do anything to the English steamer and sent the torpedo cruiser to the mouth of the harbor to keep watch. Then he pressed ahead with the Breslau past the heavily wooded cliffs which lined both sides of the elongated bay of Novorossiysk. The night had been stormy and cold, and by early morning it rained in buckets. The watch was already on alert. The cannons were readied. The flags and pennons, the telegraphs and ship telephones tested repeatedly. The searchlights detached and their remote operators checked. Everyone was watching the gun batteries erected all along the coast, but no movement could be seen, no shot, no salvo. Suddenly, officers were spotted galloping on horses up the country road to the gun batteries, most likely to inform the men that a Turkish warship had entered the port, but they came too late. The first salvos struck the batteries, from which the Russian artillerists scrambled away in every direction after several direct hits. A motorboat bearing the governmental flag raced towards them from the harbor, but because they came with every intention except that of surrendering, Kettner increased the shelling to full pelt. Only the English and Dutch steamers were not supposed to be hit. Soon all 14 Russian ships were on fire or listing in the harbor basin. The shelling ceased. The Breslau continued further to the jetty. Peering through binoculars, the commander and officers gazed at the incredibly expensive array of petroleum tanks. For the first time. The first tank had taken a hit, but aside from a thick spout of sparkling black mineral oil gushing out, nothing had happened. The next shells hit their target. All hell broke loose. A language was spreading rapidly these days, evoked from exclamations of the most extreme, the most enormous, the most unimaginable, and it was particularly cultivated in the industrial wonderland of Germany. As the battlefields in the west and east grew larger and more chaotic, as efforts to provide for the men, animals and machines and equip them with war materials became more unfathomable, and as the war itself became darker and more uncontrollable, the superlatives to describe it all took the vernacular by storm. Because it had become impossible to comprehend what people were experiencing. And now, another such incomprehensible event took place before their eyes. The explosion of the petroleum depot at Novorossiysk. The countless, meticulously welded steel tanks were as tall and wide as houses. The first tank exploded with an undescribable detonation, and it was just as impossible to describe the force that sent the cover, weighing many tons, rocketing several hundred meters into the sky and plunging back into a blood-orange sea of flames which blossomed from the ruptured tank like a paper bouquet appearing out of nowhere from the hand of a magician. Blast after blast followed. Humans had known about petroleum for thousands of years, but it wasn't until recently that they began using it and storing it in massive amounts. Never before in the history of mankind had so much petroleum gone up in flames at one time. One tank exploded after another, setting off other tanks nearby. A plume of smoke formed, cloaking Novorossiysk in nocturnal gloom. An eerie, strangely glowing night that resembled the solar eclipse several months earlier. Afterwards, the Breslau bombarded the gigantic warehouse filled with Ukrainian grain, and it too went up in flames, though not as eagerly, blazing like foothills of fire. Every man on board was awestruck by the eeriness of the blaze, especially Stichnote, this is the main character, who, relieved of guard duty and now standing on deck following the bombardment, studied the yellowish dark sky and was reminded of the book on Two Planets, which described the burning of fossil fuels as frivolous and shameful. The incredible power of petroleum was terrifying yet fascinating. The hellfire which they had set ablaze and which now illuminated the horizons for kilometers behind them would never be forgotten by those who had witnessed it. Not only did these include the deck officer and radio operator Stichnote, but also the engineer sergeant Tom Keston. God, what a fire! Kästen huffled with a rough, raspy voice. And as that was the only thing he said between two long swigs of gin, his words had a sinister, prophetic ring. In some way, they led Stichnote, who had been trained and predestinated for war, to ultimately grasp its horror. For the first time, he realized how precious peacetime had been. Then the strategy worked out. The Russians declared war, and this let the German jihad plan be started. And now we are in Constantinople, and while the embassies in Constantinople of the Entente were vacated and secret papers which could not be taken out of the country were being fed to the fireplaces instead, all of Constantinople was gripped by frantic activity. Committees convened, officials and military personnel conferred, and secret meetings took place everywhere. Strange-looking characters were seen hurrying through the streets as if they had suddenly awoken from an enchanted slumber. One of these was a man by the name of Alois Musil. He wore a burnous and headscarf and was armed with a knife and sabre, as if he had come straight out of the tale of Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. He was leaving the parsonage of the Church of St. Anthony of Padua, for he lived at the pastor's home. Even though he looked like a picture book Bedouin, with his black beard and scowling gaze, a man you wouldn't dare cross paths with. Alois Musil was an Austrian from Moravia who spoke better Arabic than High German, for his native tongue was Czech. He was a Roman Catholic priest, doctor of theology and professor of Arabic at the University of Vienna. Musil was the son of poor country folk and pursued the only path to academic betterment available to him, the priesthood. He earned his doctorate while receiving an endless barrage of catechism lessons in Olmütz, then studied on scholarship at the French Dominican École Biblique in Jerusalem, where he perfected his Hebrew and Arabic. He was disappointed by the utter dilapidation of Jerusalem, but was drawn more to the outlying areas anyway, to the Arabs. He was the first to be allowed to investigate the cave dwellings of Petra, that most mysterious settlement of the ancient Arabic world. Those facades carved from the bare cliffs created the impression of otherworldly craftsmanship. He left Petra, the lost city in Wadi Musa, the Valley of Moses, with drawings and sketches. During his travels, he secured the protection of the Terabin, the Hewatat al-Tihama, the Beli, the Shur, and the Karakye. He adopted the hairstyle, beard, clothing, and language of the Bedouin to perfection, kept their prayer times, spoke only of Allah, and yet remained a loyal, irreproachable man of the Catholic Church. One Sunday in March 1909, in front of all the chieftains of the Ruala, Lord An-Nuri ibn Shalan raised him to supreme chieftain. And ever since, he had been known by his Arabic name, Sheikh Musa ibn Nemza Arueli. The name was printed in his Ottoman travel papers alongside his Austrian name, Alois Musil. After crossing the bridge and passing the flocks of pigeons on New Mosque Plaza in Old Istanbul, this Musil of Arabia arrived at a recently constructed office building whose entrance was located at the corner of two converging streets and over which was written in Latin script, Deutsche Bank. For the location at which the meeting would take place, outside of business hours naturally, was none other than the Constantinople branch office of the most important foreign operating German financial institute, which had opened 5 years earlier. The Deutsche Bank had played a substantial role in financing the Baghdad railway, and its influence in the Orient was considerable, being that the Ottomans had borrowed most of their money from England and France. Those two powers were now seeing their investment at risk. For after 10 days at war with Russia, the Bosporus capital was abused with rumors that the next declaration of war was imminent. Sheikh Musil was received by a bank employee who had been waiting behind the front door for the conspirators' secret knock. Extending from the lobby was a corridor leading to a conference room in which the bank's board members usually held their consultations. That evening, the one and only time such a meeting took place, the Intelligence Office for the Orient had summoned every single party who would participate in implementing Oppenheim's jihad plan, the memorandum on revolutionizing the Islamic territories of our enemies. Aside from Alois Musil, who was known beyond the circles of the Secret Service and diplomatic corps for his extraordinary discoveries and contacts, and whom Oppenheim had handpicked to operate in Inner Arabia, another 24 men with their attachés were gathered there, but not a single woman. There were plenty of female spies in the West and at the Eastern Front, throughout Europe for that matter, but here, only men were trusted by the German jihadis organized by Berlin. For instance, there was the Africa researcher Leo Frobenius with his cigar and skeptical smile, half-circled beard and wide-brimmed tropical hat. Oppenheim wanted to send him to Sudan, where the memory of the Mahdi uprising was still fresh. There was Captain Fritz Klein, a tall, sharp-witted military man who had traveled throughout the Fertile Crescent, had been chosen to attack Abadan and transform this most important oil port for the British into a sea of flames. Additionally, he would attempt to convince Sheikh Ali el-Iraqi, Grand Mufti of the Shiite stronghold of Karbala, to back the German Islamic cause, which, in light of the troubling dissension between the most important denominations of Islam, the Shia and Sunni, would require the utmost skill and finesse. And there was also a group of Muslim, turbaned men, standing around like a gaggle of school children. These were prisoners of war, French colonial troops, Algerian Zouaves, who had been captured during the battles on the Marne. Oppenheim arranged, naturally with the support of the highest commanders, to herd over 100,000 Muslim prisoners into special camps to persuade them to fight for the German side. Imams were brought in to lead the prisoners in prayer. They were given food prepared according to the rules of the Quran. And Oppenheim even succeeded in producing a propagandistic journal, El Jihad, written in High Arabic and edited in Berlin. In this bi-weekly publication, Oppenheim had called Emperor Wilhelm the Sultan of Germany for the first time. Here, he depicted his dream of an enormous German Muslim legion, comprised of Moroccans, Tunisians, and Algerians who rose up against their French oppressors in the name of the Prophet Muhammad and Wilhelm of Hohenzollern. Now was the time Oppenheim stepped onto podium. He wasn't the tallest man, allowing him to gaze over the faces, turbans, African hats, and pith helmets which had been brought together by his jihad plan, the authority of the emperor and the money out from the secret fund at the Foreign Office. Never again would they assemble in the same constellation as they did this evening, Friday the 13th of November 1914. Tomorrow, the clockwork of German jihad would begin ticking. That is, as long as everything went according to plan, or God's will, or both.
I think we should. Is it too long? Yeah. Yep, go on, go on.
I'm coming to the end.
Okay.
Friends, comrades, esteemed guests, Oppenheim began, and the entire party immediately fell silent, relieved that the official program would continue, for most of them were not well versed in the pleasantries of a salon atmosphere. Drawn into battle as we are against England, which vows to fight to the bitter end, Islam will be our most powerful weapon. Egypt and India are the Achilles heels of the mighty seafaring British colossus. This explains why England has long tried to hinder our contact with the pan-Islamic and nationalistic movements of the Orient which threaten its soul. But together with us, The ground has already been sufficiently prepared for the rise of Islam. His Majesty the Emperor recognized the importance of this moment from the very start, and in wise providence forget a way to use the Mohammedan peoples, abetted by His Majesty's long attested respects toward Islam and his friendship and support of its followers. It was a good decision, and now our merciful Emperor and ruler enjoys the highest esteem in all corners of the Islamic world, in Egypt, in Inner Mesopotamia, in Tunisia and Algeria. People everywhere, not only in the Ottoman Empire, but certainly in the Persian Empire and in India as well, are praying for the victory of the German weapons as we speak. Thank you for listening.
Fascinating. Thank you for that. And Steffen, obviously there's a lot of research has gone into writing this novel.
Yeah,
Can you talk a little bit about that?
It started naturally with British intelligence. The British historians are quite into the story, and found a book in London. It's called In the Secret Service East of Constantinople, The Plot to Bring Down the British Empire. This was actually the beginning, because I thought I wanted to write about secret service and things, and then I saw this book. So this was the start. It was just about the Afghanistan expedition. And then, of course, I had to learn about the Great Game, means the fight of England and Russia, of who rules Central Asia, the politics of geostrategic that happened at this time. I had to learn about Islam, about the role of Islam in these days, the history of Islam, and finally I had to understand the mechanism of the First World War, and at the end how a battleship worked. I had never been on a battleship, so I had to read a lot of books, and of course to contact some people who know better.
Okay, and you told me that this novel actually ends in Karachi. The last chapters are in Karachi. Can you please tell us a little bit about that? That how did it end up in Karachi?
Yeah, I wrote about the famous Karachi submarine.
Yeah, the submarine chalk, I guess. The one that we used to have on submarine chalk. Yeah.
It, you know, at the end, the whole book is quite, I would say 95% is historic. It's all the persons, for example, that what I read out, at least it was just quotations from this master plan from the Foreign Office in Berlin. It's not my invention. They really wrote these things, they talked like that, and all the characters, Musil, Oppenheim, all the others are historic. But at the end, the last two chapters, I turn history. I invented another ending of the First World War, and the Islamic world, especially what happens in Pakistan or British India, well, give Europe peace. It sounds maybe a little strange, but this happens in my book, and the beginning of the surrendering of the Europeans, and when they said, okay, now we have to come to peace, is the Karachi submarine. It's a submarine that came, nobody knew actually how it was. It came in the harbor, and this symbol was so strong that they surrendered.
So you made up Karachi. You've been mostly been very faithful to history, but when it came to Karachi, you decided to just make stuff up. Yeah, that's what we do in Karachi mostly. So welcome to it. I want to talk a little bit about your previous books and your earlier life. Your biography says that you worked as a sleeping car porter, and I know that now that you're a local politician as well. How much money have you made so far from politics?
From politics?
Yes.
You know, I'm not in the construction business. If I would be somebody who builds houses or has a little company or is an architect, yeah, things happen in that way, but not as a writer. Okay. You can't make money out of politics in Germany as a writer. But you asked about the sleeping car thing. Yes, and yeah. The earlier books, it was just when I became 18, the Berlin Wall came down. And yeah, I finished high school, and finally, as many people of my generation, we realized that now Europe was open. It meant really you saw people from Poland, from Czechoslovakia in Munich, but you could also go to Prague and study there. You met people from South America in, for example, then in Prague, and all over Europe. There was a kind of euphoria, and I was part of it, and especially because I had the chance to work as a sleeping car conductor, traveling in night all over Europe, meeting so many people, and this was kind of fantastic time. We thought now history had come up to a good end, and we enjoyed it. And this is the spirit of my first books, I would say.
And you've written novels mostly, but you've written non-fiction as well. I believe you've written a travelogue. How do you decide that this is going to be a non-fiction book and there is a novel in this story?
Well, it was just by coincidence. I was invited to Morocco for 4 weeks. It was a project for the book fair. There was the Arab World, was the guest in Frankfurt, and they sent writers all over the Arab world, and I was sent to Morocco. And it was kind of, my wife was pregnant at these days. It was 1 month before she would give birth, and I was a little, should I go away? And she said, yeah. It's always my wife who says, yeah, go away. Go away for that month.
I think there's a pattern in there somewhere.
And when I arrived in Morocco, I found myself so lonely, and in a way desperate, not desperate, but lonely, and I had never been to an Islamic country, and so I started writing this diary, taking notes, because I was so lonely in the evenings. And of course, after a few days, I met people, and all the things come into rolling, and I decided to continue with the diary. So it was given by coincidence that I wrote it, but I was very happy because it gave me the chance to improve. I wrote also a chapter about the Moroccan railway system, for example.
You've been a working writer since a very young age, and I think one of the few writers who can make a living just by writing, and you're one of those lucky people who don't have to do anything else, who don't have another day job. How does that work in Germany? Are there many people like you who can just sit at home and write books and travel around the world, or do they have to have like proper jobs?
Well, I would not say there are many, but there are a lot. I can't tell you a number, but we have many institutions in Germany you could work for as a writer. For example, the radio. There are certain literary forms, radio plays, essays. You write it and you get paid. And I mean, like normal work would be paid. It's not just have 100 euros, but it's real honored. And you have theater in nearly every town with more than 100,000 inhabitants, and we have many of these cities in Germany. You find a theater, and they commission, write a play. So there are so many possibilities. You can start making of a living of writing, and of course we have a fantastic book market. That means there is a deep connection between the writers and the book traders. We love our book traders. We love our bookshops, and they do readings. They invite writers to go there. It's, yeah, I mean, one of the great things we would like to give the world is the German literary culture. It's really...
And I think from what I remember, the great thing about German readings is that if you go to a festival like this, or go to a bookshop, or do a reading, you get paid. It's like you do a reading, as soon as you finish, somebody will bring in an envelope with some cash. So, you know, we talk about Lifafa journalists here, but in Germany there are Lifafa writers. Like you go and you get paid in cash, which is, I think, the best thing a writer can get. Instead of getting a check or instead of getting a contract, somebody just gets your sign, gives you an envelope, and you can go shopping. I think that's great. A couple of last questions that I want to ask you. Your book is about war, World War. Sometimes I get the feeling that when you turn on TV, we've lost count at how many wars are actually going on right now. You can, you know, sort of watch a war with our TV dinner. Mostly that's what we do. We switch the channel and there's a war going on in some part of the world. do you have any theories that how have we ended up in this state of permanent world war?
Well, I think just if you look back at the First World War, for example, a war that happened 100 years ago. Of course, it was called the Great War because nobody would expect another war of that dimension, so they called it the Great War. And you can see, for example, at the design of the Near East as a consequence, as a result of the First World War. So you find all over the world many, many decisions made 100 years ago, 50 years ago, that's still influencing our situation. And I think that the world is in imbalance. There are so many, they constructed a world that must work out so precisely that if one thing fails, the machinery starts to break out. And I think this great war we're seeing now, like a kind of worldwide civil war, something, we have to deal with it, and we have to see that's our war. It's not the war in Pakistan or at the border or in the Near East. This is all connected, and we have to fight it to end it. I mean, that's our destiny.
So we have to fight a war to end the war. That's kind of quite poetic, as they used to say during the Vietnam War, that we have to finish this village to save it. So I guess we have actually got to that stage where we, and this phrase that we use, that is this our war or not, that has been discussed to death in Pakistan. And I think finally, last I heard, we had decided that it was our war, but I don't know what will happen a few months from now. Questions? Anybody has any questions, comments? No long speeches, please. Only Steffen will do long speeches.
Sir, seeing today's wars, mini jihad wars like Daesh, Taliban, and somewhere else in the world, could we find some pattern or connection behind these wars, as you have suggested the war or the jihad 100 years before took place?
Yeah, the question is that do you find any kind of, do you have an explanation for all the mini jihads that are going on in the world right now? Daesh and ISIS and Taliban and these kind of things.
Well, actually, I think they are all different. If you look at ISIS, it's clear that there is some other structure behind it which has nothing to do with the Islamic cause. It's a very structure of people who learned fighting a war, and they just took a kind of uniform, a kind of idea, and you have different reasons. I think what I've learned, what in this book, what the Germans tried, to use a religion or a religious idea as a weapon in the hand against your enemy and making indirect wars is one of the great problems. I mean, there are people fighting against each other, but behind them there are other powers who want them to, destabilize a region, and this indirect fighting, this kind of sending your troops and look what happens, and the people who do like that are sitting somewhere just financing and just influencing. This is really a disease. This idea of permanently involving into other countries' situation and destabilize it. This is the disease of politics right now, I think.
I wanted to ask about the translation of the book. How closely were you involved with the translator? Because the way you read out the book, it seemed as if you were, it was very easy for you to read, and it was in your language. So I wanted to ask.
Nice to say that. Thank you. Normally we are really nervous about our accent in Germany. I read these passages many times in German, so I know exactly what happens, and I know the sentences. And I gave the translation to a friend of mine. She's American, half German, and just said to her, read it. Does it sound funny, or does it sound as a normal English text? She said it's okay, and I decided just to take it.
So you translated it yourself?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. No, not bad. Not bad. Yes. Germans are quite good with translations. Lots of world literature gets translated into Germany, and the translations I've heard, I don't know German myself, but I've heard the translations are usually of very good quality. I have a friend who read my book both in English and German, and he said German is much better. Yes, sir.
In today's time, when this story is going to be a past someday, somebody would be writing books about the IS, as you're writing about the past. Wondering, how much do you think this money in few hands, imbalance, distribution of the resources, or the capitalism indirectly saying, is involved behind all this chaos? If you would like to shed some light on it.
Well, I just agree. I mean, it's like we have the idea behind our economy, especially in the early industrialized countries. Everybody knows that we are needing more than it is good. We need so much material, raw material and things from all over the world. This is how our industry works. Now the Chinese are into it also, and it's the idea behind our economy is a problem. It's the overuse of all the resources causes problems, and I think we have to change that idea of our economy.
Hi, we've been asking a German man about what he thinks of our world and the Middle East and Pakistan. Can I just as a diversion from this, ask you about Germany? Having some familiarity with Germany, just a little confused about what the sentiment now is towards the refugees. And you don't have to answer this question if it's away from your topic, but answer it if you feel like.
Well, on one hand, it's with the book, it's connected to the situation we have right now, because you could learn the Ottoman Empire was a friend of Germany, and many Germans fought there and worked there. So there was a strong connection with the last Muslim region, which at these days involved the Near East, and it's necessary to see for our public to see the long tradition of Germany and of Europe of dealing with Islam. And of course, right now, it's a kind of interesting time. We see that Europe is not a fortress, that Europe is open to the world, and we have to deal with this openness. Means we have to integrate this region of the world into our political, economical, social thinking. If all the refugees will stay in Germany, I don't know, but there is a relation that is now become very real. You can see refugees all over, and of course many people are scared. Older people are scared because things had really changed now. Even on small villages, you have now people from Iraq, from Syria, from also Pakistan, and yeah, we will have to work it out. I think it's a chance of modernizing our society, because there are many things could done better. Our bureaucracy is not at the best, I think. Some other ideas of education, and we can now learn to improve ourselves, but of course it's challenging.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by the amount of research you've put into doing this as a novel, but one of the risks you have run is that the history that you have dealt with, it might sound like a piece of fiction, something which you imagine. So I wonder why you could not write it down straight as a history. What made you transform this into a novel?
Well, because I'm a novelist, that's what we do. I mean, we take stories, things that happened, and turn it into novels. We try to explain the world in stories. I try to describe history with stories, with emotions, with characters. You could also say we think in novels. That means we think in stories, in images, metaphors, and that's the way we do.
Yeah, okay, I think one last question. Yes, yeah.
Okay, so while we're at terrorism, I just wanted to ask you, well, we have a definition of, we have a way of defining terrorism. So for us, anyone who's killing is a terrorist. But then even there are governments who kill for the sake of something, right? So I've always had this question or curiosity, you may say it. So how exactly do you define terrorism? I mean, what's your definition of terrorism might be someone else's definition of, let's say, a freedom fighter. So what is the standard definition that one can use to classify someone as terrorist? Or if there's no definition, so can I classify US as a terrorist state just because they kill people for the sake of their moral compass?
Go on. You are the politician here in this team.
I would just say, if there is a society with justice and wealth for all, I mean not luxury things, but just so everybody can have an education and can live, you will not find a terrorist in this society. And I mean poorness and injustice and things like that made people open for that ideas. And there comes somebody with money and weapons and say, well, you're a good guy, everybody was bad to you, look around you, come on, here's the idea, you got a weapon and then you get a little money and now. If there is just justice, you have no terrorism.
Last, yeah, okay, let this be the last one.
Okay, Assalamu alaikum. Actually, sir, I came from Balochistan and I'm Siraj Baloch, and I want to be a writer, I mean a great writer, a best-seller writer as well. So, may I know the secret behind your success? I mean today, almost the world know you, and that is famous that the behind of every successful man there is a supporter, there is a hand of woman. So is there something like this behind your successor?
Well, actually I met on certain points of my life, I met supporters, elder men, elder women who gave me a chance. And I met a wonderful young woman who became my wife, and she's my strongest supporter. And yeah, it has to do with other people. Normally, of course, a writer is sitting at home at his desk and is alone. This is work you do on yourself. But sometimes you need somebody who reads a few pages or say, just go for it. Don't be scared. And yeah, it's necessary to have that. And of course, you need luck to meet these people. It's not only my ability, it's also my luck. The luck I had in my life. And I'm very grateful for that.
I think this is the best advice that can be given to a young writer. Go and find a woman, fall in love with her. Failing that, find a nice boy, fall in love with him. Whatever works for you. Steffen, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.